Welcome to stage 8 of this year's Tour de l'Avenir, from Albretville-Saint-Foy to Tarentaise, 120.5 kilometers. Brutally difficult stage today. 3 categorized climbs, including 2 first categories, and the summit finish at Saint-Foy-Tarentaise. First time it has been used in the Tour de l'Avenir. And your leader of the race, who sat in this front group at the moment, a very select group it is indeed, is Bernal Gomez. The Colombian just sat at our 5th or 6th wheel in that yellow jersey. He took the stage yesterday, and with it the overall classification. 3 very difficult stages to finish off this year's Tour de l'Avenir. And Egan Bernal looking like he's going to be set fair to ride for Team Sky next year. That is the rumour. And certainly impressing many people. This will be the 6th victory for Colombia, should he hold on to the yellow jersey. We have another difficult stage tomorrow. It's been a very interesting week's racing. The first stage was won by Kasper Asgreen, and then he held on to the yellow jersey all the way through to stage 4. And then the Austrian Patrick Gamper spent 2 days in the yellow jersey, finally conceding the maillot jaune to Egan Bernal in this very difficult stage. Yesterday, won by a minute from Hauteloup to Les Cécides. Solo victory by the Colombian, broke clear on the final climb. Nobody could stay with him at all, and at the moment holds a 1-minute advantage on the general classification over James Knox of Great Britain. The young 21-year-old rides for Team Wiggins by day, sitting high on the general classification in 2nd place. And Bjorn Lambrecht, the Belgian rider, he sits at 1 minute and 9 seconds. They are the top 3 riders on GC at the moment, and this is the lead group in this race. And sat alongside me to go through what's going to be a very fascinating finale is Magnus Backstedt. And like myself, rode the Tour de l'Avenir way back when things were just in black and white. We'll talk a little bit about that later, Magnus, but no, a fascinating prospect today. We've had a few flat stages to open up this race, but a brutally difficult triptych of stages towards the back end. But Egan Bernal looks very good, and impressive performance by him yesterday.
Yeah, it certainly was a very impressive performance, and like you said, it seems to be the way with the Tour de l'Avenir, starting on sort of flat to undulating road, and then it gets harder and harder towards the back end of the race. And he, I think for as long as I can remember, he has finished up in the Alps and with some proper alpine stages, and what we have today is certainly one of those. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Bernal can do again, and more importantly, so I think for me, seeing what James Knox and the rest of the British guys are capable of doing. Scott Davis is another very interesting prospect in terms of British cycling, at least, and this is kind of, I think, a point where we need to sort of sit and take note and watch the guys who are here, because in the not too distant future we're going to see them, I think, in much bigger bike races. And not that this is it's a small bike race, but certainly some of the World Tour races, I think.
No, definitely, as I say, the Tour de l'Avenir, for those who've maybe tuning in for the first time, the literal translation of the Tour de l'Avenir is the Tour of the Future, traditionally run by the organisation of the Tour de France, and is a glimpse into the future. All of these riders are under 25, many of whom actually already ride for continental and pro-continental teams, but no World Tour riders allowed in this particular field. And the leader of this race, Egan Bernal, the Colombian rider, actually plies his trade by day for the Androni Sidemek Bottecchia team, the Italian squad. Interestingly, has a contract through to 2019, the squad of Savia. But we'll wait with interest. He hasn't officially inked his contract with Team Sky. That hasn't been released yet, but he's been closely linked with the squad, and what an addition to Team Sky if he were to finally make the move across to the British squad.
Yeah, I think it is a good move for him to do, and obviously a much bigger team than the Androni team, but at the same time he's moving into a completely different setup where he's likely to be one of the other guys, if you know what I mean by that. There's so many top quality climbers within that particular team that I think he'll have a fight on his hands to try and sort of remain a name and get the opportunities to to show what he can do and to race for himself to win, because like I said, there's at least a good sort of 7-8 riders who are capable of doing exactly what he does.
Yeah, as I say, it's going to be interesting for him to move over to that particular team. Interesting rider, started off riding on mountain bikes, got a silver and bronze in the Junior World Championships a few years ago, and was picked up by the Italian team, signed a long-term contract, relatively long-term for such a young rider, signed for them back in 2016, and as I mentioned a few moments ago, officially has a contract through to 2019, but a real demonstration of power yesterday. Rode away from the field. As I said before, it's James Knott who took a fine second place. Then we had a clutch of riders, many of whom, or most of whom, are still sat in this front group. We're on the climb of Les Arcs, climbs up to 1,800 metres, coming towards the top of the climb now, before the drop down to the valley, and then the kick up to the final climb of the day, which interestingly goes up in steps as well. Several descents, and then the final climb to the line at Saint-Foy de Tarentaise. Itself is a second category climb, and the categorised part of the climb is 6.5 kilometres in length. The average gradient also 6.5%, and the first time indeed that the Tour l'Avenir has climbed this particular hill. And a very select group of riders. They're being led by a Belgian, and they have Bjorn Lambrecht, the 20-year-old Belgian, rides for the under-23 Lotto team. He is in this group as well. Some other very interesting riders too there. Lucas Hamilton of Australia, winner of the Tour of Alsace, he's also in the group. Ed Niklas of Denmark is there. He also sits at 1 minute and 9 seconds. Matteo Febro of Italy is also in that group. Very, very good climber indeed. He signed a contract with Katusha Alpecin for next year. Again, giving you an indication of the class of riders. This really, as Magnus said a few moments ago, is a glimpse into the future. Bernal Bernal himself was fourth overall in last year's Tour l'Avenir, and if he does manage to win at this year's Tour l'Avenir, still a lot of racing to go. He'll be the 6th Colombian victor. He'll join Alfonso Flores, who won back in 1980, Martin Ramirez in 1985, and then Nairo Quintana won in 2010. Esteban Chavez is riding the Vuelta a España at the moment. He won in 2011, as is Miguel Angel Lopez of Astana. He's over at the Vuelta, but did win this race back in 2014. And I think, Magnus, that gives you a real indication of the class of riders who perform well in this race and then go on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, I mean, if you do go back and have a look at all the riders that have been here and won at this level, there are some significant sort of icons of professional cycling over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and I think when really it's such a prestigious race to go to and to win, and it's nice to see, though, as well as I think at the moment that there are national teams being here racing. Yes, they bring in some of the top continental and pro-continental riders from around the world, but they're still representing their country here, because to me it's kind of been a bit of a it should be a race where national teams come and show off the best that they have to offer, and then they go away from there then and sort of turn professional, really. So ideally, I mean, to me it should be a Nations Cup where the highest rank that you can have should be a continental team, and that way then you actually show the guys off, and they have opportunities to really prove themselves to the World Tour teams and the pro-continental teams.
Yeah, they've toyed around with the format over the last few years, haven't they? Now, when I rode this race, you rode it in 1996, we were talking before we came on air, as we look to the back of this front group, they've just gone over the top of Les Arcs. It's a 12.7 kilometre climb. A little bit steeper than the finish climb, 7.2%. They've now got a long plummet down into the valley before the kick up to the final climb. So stage 8 of the Tour l'Avenir, 120.5 kilometres, but 3 categorised climbs in the French Alps. Beautiful day today. This is the lead group on the road, and the rider just at the back there from Denmark. That's Michael Storer. just struggling to get back in contact. A couple of those technical turns. The riders now have a long descent to the valley in Cise, and that is where the road starts to kick up. A couple of small plateaus before the final climb to the line, but there could be an opportunity here for a few more riders to get back in contact. This is the ski station just near the top, the Station des Arcs. Of course, a frequent location the Tour de France has passed through. But it is good that this race, there's a rest day, and it is essentially a mini Tour de France. We look at the Dauphiné, which is essentially a concentrated version of the Tour de France for the World Tour riders, etc. And this does give that kind of insight into the ability of riders. We have a time trial, of course. No, there's no time trial in this race. There has been time trials.
Yeah, it has been in the past.
It's primarily sprint stages, a couple of undulating stages. But we have 3 brutal alpine stages which have actually characterised the race over the last few years. A bit of a slowing down in the pace here. Trying to see in this group if there's many, if our race leader has many Colombian teammates. It's Australia who now lead at the front. A couple of riders from Norway in the mix, but a little bit of a regrouping here. It's a little bit of a, there is, as they crest the line for the King of the Mountains points, it drops down, then kicks up again before the drop down. So they now have about 500 meters of climbing before the drop down. You see one of the French riders in the lead group 2. No French riders, interestingly, in the top 10 overall. Of course, David Gaudu won the race last year, now plies his trade for FDJ.
Yeah.
A couple of British riders in the move, and as I say, great rider by James Knox. No wins this year for Knox, but can climb superbly well. Managed to break away from the chasing group yesterday to finish solo at 1 minute, 9 seconds ahead of a clutch of riders behind him. But a really good performance by Knox.
Yeah, very good ride indeed. I mean, at any point, if you're in the mix of those front guys over this kind of terrain, you're definitely doing a good ride. But yeah, it's nice to see that we got some British interest up there in the front, and going for the overall of this, because effectively is that today and tomorrow that's really going to make the difference in terms of who we got winning this race. I think it's going to be difficult to dislodge Bernal from the top step of the podium. He looked that good yesterday and looked very much in control. So as long as he rides smart, then I think he'll be difficult to move away from.
Yeah, I think from a physiological perspective, he clearly is the strongest rider, and of course has performed so well this year at some of the biggest races in the world. A great race program riding for the Androni team. If you just look back through his performances this year, another reason why he's been taken the interest of many of the World Tour teams. He was a 16th overall in the Vuelta Ciclista San Juan, which opened up the year. Then he was 7th overall in the Tour of Langkawi. You know, a very impressive 16th overall at Tirreno Adriatico. Then we move on to the Settimana Internazionale Coppi a Bartali, 4th on GC there, so performing well, way outside of his age category. And then Tour of the Alps, he finished in 9th place on the general classification. It's an impressive run of form for a rider so young. And then finished off by winning the Cebu Cycling Tour, the overall classification there, and then the Tour de Savoie Mont Blanc as well. You know, a real rider of class, so still relatively tender in age, only 20 years of age, and those sorts of performances, I think especially 16th overall in Tirreno Adriatico, does give you a real insight into the burgeoning talent that he has.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, at the age of 20, you're still developing as a rider. You're still developing muscularly as well. So I think from a physiological aspect, he's in a very good place to continue onto some bigger and better things. But he's certainly performing very solidly so far, and it's good to see that we got these young riders coming through, and there's some super talents in there.
So now the Australians have 2 riders in the mix in this group. They have Lucas Hamilton and Jay Hindley. And one of the French riders was Valentin Madouas. We'll get as many of those numbers as we can through, confirming the composition of the group that's going to take on the final climb of today's stage, the penultimate stage, of course, of the Tour l'Avenir. As one of the Swiss riders just takes to the front, as Magnus was alluding to earlier on.
I think this is the chasing group actually on the road. Am I No, that's, yeah, sorry, you're right there. So I'm just picking.
Had a little group go earlier, but Bernal looking very good there in the yellow jersey, sat in fourth wheel at the moment as the riders now finally plummet down. As we see one of the Italians having a bit of a mechanical there. So lovely aerial shots of this crew snaking their way down the climb of Les Arcs. So that is a number 131, that's Matteo Fabro. A very slow wheel change for Fabro, the young Italian there. White kit with the Italian flag. And as we see the riders snaking down this beautiful alpine pass, we're going to take our first commercial break. Welcome back. Just over 27 kilometers to go of the penultimate stage of Le Tour de l'Avenir. And we have a very select group of riders that has formed over this brutally difficult course today. It's worth reflecting back on what the riders have faced today. The first climb of the day, that came after 38 kilometers. That was the Comet d'Orselin, a long climb, just under 20 kilometers in length, had an average gradient of 6.2%. Then they dropped down and climbed an uncategorized climb. As we just see one of the Swiss riders just taking a little bit wide there, Magnus. Yeah, some good speedway skills there.
Yeah, I think he saved that one pretty well, but clearly got the apex wrong and actually got the sort of misread the terrain around him, how sharp that corner was going to be, which is one of the most difficult things with descending in the big alpine sort of areas where you look down here and you can't really tell where the road is going, so you have to work out where what the mountain is doing, what the you know, where the trees are going, and try and sort of spot the edge of the road a little bit in terms of what sort of line is the it's a sort of curb taking and guardrails or anything that can give you a bit of an idea as to how sharp the corner is coming up ahead of you is, and clearly got that slightly off.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the climbs, especially these younger riders, many of these riders won't know these climbs. A lot of the pros, Tour de France, the Giro, especially some of the older statesmen, this rider's getting it a little bit wrong on this descent. This is number 96. It's Willy Gregard de Wiltzy of Denmark.
And it's also damp on the tarmac there, which throws you even further because you're going into these corners. It's sunny. This shouldn't be wet. You're going into the corner as if it's dry, and then all of a sudden you see that it's damp on the ground. At which point you're carrying too much speed. You're taking the wrong apex, and things usually go pear-shaped very, very quickly then.
Yeah, that's it looks like as we're coming into the time of year, as the sun gets a little bit lower, the shadow is cast over the road just a little bit longer. Of course, for the Tour de France, when the sun is very, very high in the sky, you don't get quite as many patches in shade for so long. But I think I'd rather have a completely wet descent than one that runs wet and dry. At least you know the lines to take. You're consistently going at one sort of speed. But when you're approaching a corner, as you said, Magnus, on the dry, you come through and you've already got the bike banked over, and then suddenly it's wet. It's a little bit panic stations. I think that's why we're seeing a few little gaps here. Riders are just allowing for a little bit of sliding space in between the wheel in front.
Yeah, just you're better off being slightly cautious on descents like this, but at the same time there's nothing more annoying than going into a corner thinking it's looking a bit wet and then it's bone dry through the whole apex, and you just grab way too much speed off, and then you're having to kick it all back up to full flight again. But at the same time, you've got to think the longer game all the time, and you're better off sort of slowing down a fraction and keeping all the skin on your body and making it all the way to the finish.
Yeah, certainly one way of putting it. Keeping your skin on your body, definitely that is what these riders will be trying to do. A lovely view here. Not too much time or opportunity for the riders to take a look, but as we plummet down the descent, it's worth taking a little bit of a look back over some of these the opening stages of this race. 9 stages long in total. The final stage starts tomorrow in Bourg-Saint-Maurice and finishes in Albès-Montron, another brutally difficult stage. But we started up in Ludac. That stage was won by Casper Agreen, who put himself into the yellow jersey in the process. Stage 2, which finished in Bignon, was won by Fabio Jacobsen, the under-23 champion of the Netherlands. As we see the riders at the back there having a little bit of difficulties, a little bit of a rise there. Stage 3 was won by Christopher Halverson, the under-23 world road race champion from Norway. And then we saw stage 5 to Saumur, won by Christopher Lawless of Great Britain. Casper Agreen won, or kept hold of the yellow jersey on that stage. And then stage 5 to Amboise. That was a stage that was punctuated and characterized by a long breakaway containing 3 riders. The winner of the stage was Vasiliy Strukau of Belarus, but the rider who finished second on that particular stage was Patrick Gamper. Unexpected for him to go into the jersey. That breakaway took around 3 minutes on the main bunch. Yesterday was won by a Colombian, well, the day before yesterday, sorry, stage 6 to Saint-Amand-Montrond was won by Alvaro Jose Hodeg. Patrick Gamper kept the jersey, and then, as we've already alluded to and touched upon, yesterday's stage, the first of the big mountain days, was won by Egan Bernal, and he moved himself into the yellow jersey. So an interesting week's racing, but the GC, as you said, all about these final 3 stages.
Yeah, very much so. And like I said, just looking at the Danish riders, rider here trying to stay on to the back of the group, and just being a bit too cautious onto the brakes too early, and not kicking out of the corners, not applying the power early enough either. So he's certainly finding this descent a little bit too nerve-wracking, I should probably say.
Yeah, I think, and sometimes, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning again. You know, this is the Tour Avenir, the Tour of the Future. These riders, nowhere near reaching their full potential. What we're seeing in these races is glimpses of the future. Hence the name of the race. And not just from a physiological perspective, these riders have got a lot of learning to do as well. So from a skill set as well, we might not necessarily, Magnus, see these riders having a full set of skills like we see in the professional peloton. There's still a lot for these riders to learn. There's some very good, adept riders there with good skills, but other riders still with a fair distance to go.
Yeah, I think you, to an extent you're right, but then again I do see some shocking descending in the pro peloton as well, and have done for some time. It's that famous saying that what goes up must come down at some point, and not everyone is capable of doing it in a good way. But it just completely depends on how confident you are on the bike, how confident you are with corners, and your braking points, how much time you've spent actually descending climbs like this. Practice does make perfect at the end of the day, and I guess that's the way we've got to look at it. They probably are, some of these guys, and certainly the Danes living up in what should we call it, very, very flat land, probably might not have spent as much time descending these climbs.
Yeah, well, he's got for company the Danish rider there. That's Tiago Antunes of Portugal in that white jersey with the blue and red shorts. And as you can just see, the Danish rider just having a little bit of a problem on some of those corners. And Tiago Antunes there adopting that very, very aerodynamic tuck with a bit of a lean on board as well. He was sat on the top tube, wasn't he? That was the style we first saw adopted, of course, by Mahi Mohoric, who took his first World Tour victory, great yesterday, in the Vuelta a España, over there, down in Spain, of course. But and the rider off in front looks like it's the Swiss rider in this group. It's, again, that's an interesting style there. He's on the top tube, but leaning to one side so we can see in front of the rider in front. I
personally don't get the reason why you would sit down on the top tube like this, because the bike doesn't handle you not actually that much quicker. There are other ways of doing it where you can,
especially on a rider's wheel as well.
Yeah, there's so much that go, can go wrong and will go wrong at some point for when you're adopting that particular position. There are other ways you can sit on the bike that is probably just about as quick, but where you can control it in a better way.
There you go. It's certainly one of those styles that is we've seen in become very, very popular over the last couple of years at the very least, with the Swiss rider out in front. He's just now knocked things off a little bit. So some real good descending skills from him. Let's just go through the composition of this breakaway. With only 18 climbs to go, they've now reached the valley. Just going to go through the town of Sez, and then the road starts to kick up in stages before the final climb to the line. So we've got Valentin Madouas here. This is Gino Mada of Switzerland. Just rolling through. I think he's taking advantage of the gap that he's opened on that descent, and why not? Got back into the aero tuck, and is actually Magnus starting to press on now.
Yeah, and why not? He's clearly opened up a bit of a gap, and he's in a position there where he can put some pressure onto the other riders in that group. And I guess the thing is here is we don't have massive teams that you know, we don't see a full, should we call it, Team Sky train sitting on the front of this this group here, and the group of favourites is ones and twos, and maybe there's, I think the Danes had 3 or 4 riders in there. At any point, if you can just drift off the front like Merda did here on the descent, then all of a sudden the rest of the group will have to chase, and who's going to do that? And sometimes it ends up being one of the favourites from another team that has to actually spend the energy. So it's worth just keeping that ticking along at the top there.
Definitely. Well, Gino Mäder, who's gone clear from Switzerland, he's at 2 minutes and 36 behind our race leader Egan Bernal, and the number 4 is Valentin Madouas of France. He sits at 3 minutes and 38, so no real threat. But of interest, Magnus, is the fact that we're not aware that Egan Bernal has any teammates in there. I think they've used themselves up earlier on. Very, very strong climbing squad. They can also sprint particularly well. They've taken 2 stages of this race. But looking at the composition of that group, I could not see any other white Colombian jerseys, and that must be a little bit of a worry for him. Although I think once the road really starts to pitch up, teammates are important, but not quite as important given the kind of strength that we've seen him display yesterday in particular.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does come. It does sort of play less significance when you're starting to climb, and when the road gets really quite steep. I should say the final climb here is 6.5 kilometers at 6.5%. So it's not a crazy difficult climb, but I think it's enough for Bernal to really put some pressure on the rest of the world.
Well, welcome back. Just going through the town of Seez, our elite group of front riders in the penultimate stage of the Tour de l'Avenir. There is 2 riders that have just gone clear, not actually on the final climb just yet, just going through the town of Seez, as I mentioned. They'll then climb up to Villarogère, and they'll drop down to Sainte-Foy-Tarinissez before the commencement of the climb. And it is Bernal who is being forced to chase. And the fact that he's on the front there definitely indicates he's got no teammates, nobody willing to assist him. I don't blame them either. Showed his strength yesterday, so a good idea to force him to put his nose into the wind. Of course, isolating the yellow jersey in a situation like this is what you need to do if you've got any hope of trying to wrestle the jersey from his shoulders. We're just under 15 kilometers to go of the 8th stage of the Tour de l'Avenir. 120.5 kilometers in length, 3 brutal climbs, and the final climb to the line up the Sainte-Foy-de-Tarente will come in about 8 or 9 kilometers time. A couple of long drags, and a situation here that's unfolding where we have one of the Australian riders. We'll get the number as soon as we can. Remember, we've got a couple of Australians in the top 10. Lucas Hamilton sits in fourth place. Then we have Jay Hindley in 11th. So they're very well placed on the GC. But it's an interesting situation here, Magnus, where the yellow jersey just on the front of this group is now being forced to chase. He's isolated, so unsurprisingly that the other teams are now putting him under just a little bit of pressure, maybe trying to draw the sting from his legs.
Well, and rightly so. Like we said, Mäder here, he drifted off the front on the descent, got a couple of hundred, well, maybe 100 meters or so, and it kept the pressure going. And right now that's causing quite a lot of worry for Bernal. I think he's having to ride on the front on his own. Although I think if he's smart about this, he'll just basically sit and hold it and not worry too much about this one. I think that was Michael Storer, the Australian rider, on the back of that as well. But I think for Bernal, it's just keeping it steady, not going too hard, leaving all the sort of legs for the final climb, and then really just turning it on then and trying to bridge the gap on the climb rather than doing it on the flat.
Yeah, well, as the yellow jersey, you are the one that's obliged to close down any gaps, but I think you're quite right there, Magnus. This was headed onto this pitted, rutted little bit of road. That's one thing about the Tour de l'Avenir. We often discover some different routes, and this is the first time they're going to be heading up this finish climb, the first time it has been used in this race. And 12 seconds now for our 2 riders who just managed to extricate themselves from the group, Storer and Mäder. Storer now on the front, familiar Australian national jersey, and Bernal, and if he's panicking a little, he's actually left that group, attacked and has now shut down the gap. A real display of strength here. Will he go straight past, or he is going straight past, already just trying to put the hurt on the other riders already.
Well, I think that's the right way of doing it. If you're that good on the climb, then there's no point in sitting there waiting for too long either. Go across to the break there, or to those two riders, stay there, and then see what happens. I guess what he doesn't need to do is sit and panic here and really ride too hard. He just needs to ride within himself, to the point where everyone is finding it too uncomfortable, so that they stop thinking about maybe attacking him.
Yeah, he's a one-man team at the moment. He is sat on the front, shut that gap down when the road started to rise up. This is the climb to Villaroger, an uncategorized climb, which is essentially part of the final climb. It drops down and then kicks up for the last 6Ks to the finish. But as you said, he's setting a kind of tempo that isn't only deterring other riders from attacking Magnus, he's actually putting several classy bike riders out of the back. This rider at the moment from Colombia, 20 years of age, remember, already with a relatively glittering palmares in terms of the races he's picked up, the sorts of performances he's managed to carry out, dominating this race and imposing himself already. It's going to make for some very nervous times for the other riders. I think they're struggling to hold on his wheel. This group now is about 12 or 13 riders strong, as we see one of the Italians, that's Matteo Fabro, getting dropped all over his bike now.
Yeah, labouring on that gear, turning quite a big gear. Just goes to show that probably the engine is starting to fail a bit, and at that point you usually end up just turning as big a gear as you possibly can. Whatever your legs can stomp out is what you do.
I think that's a good example of how you feel when you feel tired as a rider. You lose that souplesse. You know when you're going well, you can just spin a gear, you can accelerate, you can just use almost like one gear on a climb, can't you? But when you're starting to tire, all you try and do is just lever as big a gear. You're trying to use your body weight to just roll things around a little bit. But interesting that Italian was out the back there, because Matteo Fabro did a good ride yesterday. He's sitting in 6th place on the general classification at 1 minute and 9 seconds, but clearly perhaps paying the price for his efforts yesterday and struggling, as we still see Bernal on the front looking very good. He's got a beautiful style on the bike as well, rolling that gear around, not exactly twiddling a small gear, but more the kind of cadence that we see from Nairo Quintana almost.
I was going to say that there are, out of all of the Colombian riders, there are very few of them that actually sit and apply the sort of Chris Froome kind of twiddling the gear over. They tend to labour a little bit more on the gear, use a bit more strength, and I've sort of tried to work out why, but I haven't come up with a good explanation so far as to why that is. But yeah, more often than not, you see the Colombian guys just using a bit bigger gears.
You do. I think Esteban Chavez is another rider. He certainly doesn't pedal particularly quickly, rides in a very similar way to the Yates brothers in terms of the cadence on the bike, rolls the gear around rather than kind of pedals a high cadence. I think you can almost pick Chris Froome in his own kind of category, because his washing machine kind of style is very, very unique. And then of course Alberto Contador out of the saddle. We talk about optimum cadence on climbs, don't we? But it's all down to individual physiology as well, and you can adapt to a particular style and actually make it very, very efficient.
Well, the optimum cadence is always the cadence that works for you.
Exactly. That is it. That is it. And it's certainly working for this rider at the front at the moment. He's putting the hurt on a lot of these riders. Still around 15 riders in this lead group. One of the Russians is there too. We have 2 riders in this group in the blue, Artem Nich and Dmitry Strakov. Nobody has assisted at all. Very, very confident indeed is Egan Bernal. As we see the yellow jersey on the front, although we haven't seen him today, it's worth just talking about the other leaders of the classifications. Christopher Halvorsen, he's in the green jersey, but unsurprisingly not in this front group on such a difficult stage. Riding for Norway, the under-23 World Road Race Champion and the leader of the King of the Mountains classification, by virtue of a long lone breakaway yesterday. That was Johannes Schillingel of Germany, but he's not in this front group.
James Knox coming back here for hopefully not a mechanical.
Let's have a look. Maybe he's asking for some food, but generally he won't be able to get feed. 11k to go. It's the last 20k, so no feeding allowed. It's
no, bar is closed.
The bar is definitely closed. The bell is rung for last orders as Bernal still lead this group.
Rear puncture.
That's not a particularly good thing there for James Knox. He doesn't have any teammates with him. I've not actually seen any teammates.
But he's doing the right thing here, though. He's still waiting for the team car to come up, and he's riding that flat tire for as long as he possibly can here now, just trying to stay attached to the peloton. Don't stop until your team car is right on top of your back wheel, basically. At that point, you swap the stop and swap over.
James Knox desperately waving his arm, but the thing is, on these very narrow roads, it is difficult for the team cars to move up. But because he's in second place overall, well, they could get neutral service, and also his team car is in second position in the convoy behind the Colombian team. So an interesting situation there for Knox. Hopefully he'll get a wheel change very soon. So coming into the final 11 kilometres of stage 8 of the Tour de l'Avenir. Saint-Foy-Tarente is the climb that is looming, and our race leader Egan Bernal is on the front, sending a pretty ferocious rhythm. But meanwhile, second place on GC from Great Britain, James Knox, has suffered a puncture.
And team cars are now back up there with the riders, so that's a GB team car.
Well, only one GB rider in there, as we said. A great ride yesterday by James Knox, but Scott Davis is riding very well as well. Here's the wheel change. Let's hope it's a pretty speedy one for the youngster. Drops
Key thing is going to be not to panic here now, though. When he gets that wheel in, start riding. Don't go too hard, too quickly. Just plug away and try and make your way back in there.
I think the good thing, well, there's no good thing about puncturing this late into the race, but as you said, he doesn't want to panic, because if you panic on a climb, you just put yourself immediately into red. But just look at his, looks pretty composed there. Doesn't look like he's putting himself. He's going to have to press on a little bit, but he needs to measure his effort, get himself to the back of that group. But he does have a little bit of respite in a couple of kilometres' time. They have that little plateau, then it drops down before kicking up at the base of the climb to the finish line. So Knox there looking very good, and I'd imagine he should get back into contention. As you see Bernal for the first time, just looking around, maybe easing off a little bit, looking at the composition of who is there, who's going to pose him a threat. I'm just wondering if anybody's got the strength to attack this Colombian.
Well, that is the question. I don't think anyone. Well, the strength to attack him, probably yes, but the question is whether they got the strength to ride away from him.
Yeah, there's one thing, putting a stinging acceleration on a climb, but that puts you essentially into the red, and it's sustaining it, as you said, Magnus. That's why we've seen the style of racing changing a little bit as riders understanding how important it is to ride at set power. But I think it's important that riders learn how to ride on feel as well. But he's got himself back into that group, jersey flapping. And it's the gradient on this part of the climb not too steep, so there will be a little bit of an aerodynamic advantage in sitting in that group as well, getting sucked along a bit, recouping. Look at that, he's moving right to the front. Good. Unsurprisingly, because he's a rider sitting second overall, wants to get back in the mix. Fourth or fifth wheel from the front. Good bit of riding there by Knox.
And that's the best place to sit at any point, certainly on a climb like this. It's just right near the front. You've got control of what's happening in front of you. You can move yourself clear if you need to respond to something. But at the same time, you're getting whatever slight aerodynamic benefit there is from drafting. You're still picking that up. So good ride there by James Knox.
Well, the race for James Knox before this was the very hilly Tour Alsace. Again, a race on French soil. He was second on stage 3, ended up 6th overall in that race, so clearly riding well. And one rider has attacked from this group now. Looks like it might be Knox, in fact, who's just going clear. No, it's not one of the Australians, sorry, who's gone clear. And the Australians are here in number. There are a couple of riders in this group. Lucas Hamilton, Jay Hindley, and Michael Storer. And one of the riders from Switzerland has tried to close things down. Here's the attack again on the right-hand side. Classic move, whilst the yellow jersey is on the front. I wonder who'll be the rider to shut it down. Bernal is actually back on the front of this group, slowly bringing things back, rolling that gear. Very stable on a bike, hands on the hoods, not panicking at all, not bothering to jump across, happy to bring everybody back into contention. That's an interesting way of riding. Yeah,
I think it is a very good way of riding. He's doing it really smart here as well. But you can see that the difference between Bernal, how he's sitting very calm, composed, strong on the bike, just plugging away at it, whereas our Australian friend here is a lot more sort of erratic with his body movements, and just, yeah, it doesn't look quite as controlled and as sort of composed.
I think it's fair to say that this rider here is on the limit, and Bernal behind is clearly riding hard, but far more in control and gradually bringing him back rather than accelerating harshly, bringing the gap down in quickly. He's doing it very, very slowly, almost letting him hang out there.
And I think that's probably the thought process behind this as well, is just leave him sitting out there, try and get him to waste as much energy as possible, and hopefully he just comes back to me instead. If I just keep on going at this pace, then it's not really going to be too much to worry about. That's Jay Hindley.
Yeah, Jay Hindley there sits 11th overall at 1 minute and 29 seconds. But a good move by the Australian, I think, maybe trying to draw the sting out of Egan Bernal, because the Australians do have Lucas Hamilton in 4th place on the general classification at only 1 minute and 9 seconds. And remember, in a minute, in about a kilometre's time, the road drops down for about 1,500 meters or so, and then kicks up for 6.5 Ks to the line. So good tactical ploy here by the Australians, and also good to see they've also got Michael Storer in 12th position. So the Australians, in between the 3 riders who we believe are in this front group, definitely got a few options to at least try and put Bernal under a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, definitely, and then I think they're doing it in the right way. It's just you got to try something, and this is definitely the best way forward, I think.
We're just going over through the little village of Villaroger, and this is where the road just drops down briefly before we commence the final climb of the day. The second category ascent of Sainte-Foy Tarentaise, remember 6.5 Ks at 6.5% average gradient. Another rider just starting to feel the bite of the pace being set in this group. A little Portuguese rider at the back, and that is Antunes. Been yo-yoing on the descent, and now he's yo-yoing on the climb. Just got back in contact there before the road drops again, but not too much rest for these riders now. We're going to take our final commercial break. Please don't go away. Keep it here on your home of cycling. We're now on the final climb to the line, and already we've seen some pressure being applied on the front of this group by the race leader, Egan Bernal. There was a little breakaway, took a few seconds. Jay Hindley of Australia, sitting at 1 minute and 29 on the general classification, was clear. He has now been caught by Bernal. There's James Knox just on the left-hand side. Remember, he's sitting in 2nd place on the general classification. And this is similar to the situation we saw yesterday. Bernal attacked from a lead group of riders, and that acceleration at the foot of the climb to the line has further reduced this group. We had 16 riders heading to the bottom of this climb, and already in the first few hundred meters, that sharp acceleration to neutralize that move by the Colombian has shed a lot of riders. And I must admit, Egan Bernal looking very, very strong indeed. So the last 6.3 kilometers of stage 8 of the Tour de l'Avenir, 120.5 kilometers in length, and for the very first time we're finishing on the climb of Sainte-Foy Tarentaise. And the rider on your screen leading the group at the moment that has been whittled down over this brutally challenging course today in the French Alps is Egan Bernal of Colombia. Rides by day for Androni Sidemek Bottecchia, the Italian squad. It's all about the national colours today. He is clad in yellow, he is the race leader. And look at this, Magnus, already split this group down, still just over 6 kilometers to go to the finish of this climb. So the even gradient all the way up, not too steep, but the way he's ridden over the last few days, yesterday in particular, pretty happy to just set his own rhythm and hardly even looked around, just takes a look at the damage and rises out the saddle. Another one of those little accelerations. It looks like he's just going to continue to whittle this group down.
Yeah, and I think he's doing the right thing. I don't think he even needs to worry about going too hard and dropping people at this point in time. It's just keep the pace going, keep working. No one is going to ask, basically give him a turn on the front, because they're all too worried about him effectively attacking and dropping them. So he needs to just find a rhythm and just keep on plugging away, and then work out what to do with a kilometre or so left to the top. If he starts asking for help, then I think he's doing the wrong thing.
I think you're right. There was a little bit of a look over his shoulder, then a swing off. This is the second group on the road now. And since we've been climbing, that initial acceleration has split this group. That is number 176 there, Tobias Foss of Norway. And then we swing again to the front. Looking very, very smooth indeed. A flick of the elbow there, a little bit of a cheeky flick. If I were you, I wouldn't ride with him. I'd rather attack him. You don't need to sit on the front because he is so dangerous. Looks like a coiled spring. And a couple of Australians in that group, 2 Belgians as well. We have Bjorga Lambrecht, 20-year-old Belgian. He's in that group. He sits in 3rd place overall. Also there is Michael Schlegel of the Czech Republic. He's wearing the orange shorts. He rides for Sprandi CCC Polgevice. That's his professional squad.
And I think that's the Danish rider Niklas Egg in there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, Egg, the 22-year-old, is also there. Rides for Ram Velo Concept. But now Bernal has just gone to the back of this group. And Australia now take up the pacemaking, but nobody really willing to press on too hard. And I think that's reflected in this sort of gradient. It is the sort of gradient where you can actually get a lot of benefit from sitting in the wheel as well.
Attack from Egg.
And Egg goes on the right-hand side, trying to smash things up a little bit. It's a good move here by Egg. James Knox looking around for some assistance, and that assistance has come in the form of Michael Schlegel, the Czech rider. He now lifts himself out of the saddle and closes this thing down because it's very, very close. Behind Bernal on the GC, we have James Knox at 1 minute, and then there's only 23 or 24 seconds separating the rest of the top 10. So unsurprising to see these other riders just looking around, making sure that their place on the GC isn't threatened at all.
Yeah, and I think they need to worry a little bit about that as well. And you know, there are riders here who got basically something to gain from keeping this group going. Whereas I think Bernal, he's safe in whatever way he goes. Those guys are coming up from behind here now. They obviously can cause a bit of a problem on the general classification. So yeah, it might be worth a couple of turns on the front there from certainly like guys like the Belgians.
Well, it's Lucas Hamilton who's now gone to the front to do a little bit of pacemaking, and that group has made contact again. That slowing of the pace, the unwillingness of any of the riders to take it up, has provided an opportunity for that group to get back in contact. And also one rider has seized an opportunity to try and attack, essentially slingshotted around the inside, and it was the Norwegian rider who was making a lot of the pacemaking earlier on. So a good attack. It looks like it might be Tobias Foss who's gone clear. So Foss there using the apex of the corner to essentially slingshot himself round. And it is interesting, although we are going uphill, the physics and the kind of dynamics of these hairpin bends, if you get them right, you can actually use the momentum gained by going up the inside, all the outside. So a good little move by Niklas Egg, of Denmark, who's gone clear.
No, I think the graphic is wrong there. It's definitely a Norwegian jersey. So Foss is giving this one a good attack, and why not? I think there was an opportunity there to be had where everyone was looking at each other, but now it's James Knox going after Foss here. And Bernal is going to have to respond here quite quickly.
He certainly was. He dropped to the back of that group a little bit, but now he's going to have to go clear because Knox clearly a threat at only 1 minute.
And Hamilton is in there as well, the Australian who's lying 4th on the general classification.
So a good move here by both Knox and Hamilton. Lambrecht is the rider who's just going across the gap now in the middle of your screen in that blue jersey with the red and the yellow stripe through the centre. So the Norwegian rider now heading things up at the front of this group. Knox is on his wheel with his jersey fully unzipped for Great Britain.
Interesting. There's a couple of the guys in here now who were sort of in the second group just now, and they managed to make it back into the front group, obviously, and now found themselves with an advantage again. So all sorts of sort of strange happenings here.
Well, that just shows. I mean, it's never over. So good move there by the rider on your screen now, Tobias Foss. Out of the groups, out of the riders in the front, he has the most to gain. He sits at 2 minutes and 8 seconds. If he manages to go clear, he could catapult himself well into the top 10. So unsurprising to see him riding. So Knox is there. Bjorg Lambrecht of Belgium is also there. 4.1 kilometers to go. Schlegel is there for the Czech Republic as well as the leader of the race, Egan Bernal. Lucas Hamilton there, Looks like he's got a tear in his shorts, Magnus. Looks like he's come to... he's had a bit of a crash earlier in the day. Or is that the logo? It looks actually
I think it's the logo.
It looked like a bit of a tear in his shorts. Apologies there. So 3.9 kilometres to go. Very even gradient to the top of the climb today at Sainte-Foy-Tarentaise. Unless the rider's done a recon. It isn't anywhere that a race has been up in the past.
Obviously there will be staff from the various different teams who have driven up here now, who've been able to get radio back into, or call back into the team car to let everyone know what's what. Egg is having a go with Bernal. Now's the time to respond, James Knox, if you've got anything left in your legs.
Yeah, that's a good move there. So Bernal looking very, very good. A good attack there by Niklas Egg, the 22-year-old, looking very, very strong. And Bernal happy to sit in his slipstream. Egg sits at 1 minute and 9 seconds, and here's that attack again. Nothing any of the other riders can do about it apart from the race leader. And just look at that, the attack out of the saddle by the Danish rider, but Bernal just sat down nice and smooth. To me, it looks like he's got a little bit more in the tank. I don't think he's been put under too much pressure at the moment. But Niklas Egg looking very, very smooth as well.
Yeah, he certainly does. I've got to say, there's some very interesting bike setup for a climber on that bike. You would have thought with a team like what he's got behind him with Bjarne Riis at the sort of driving part of that is very, very low front end, and
he's quite a way forward on that bike here, and he had and on the Cervelas you can actually flick those saddles round, can't you? It looks like he had more of a kind of a TT, borderline triathlon kind of position, very, very forward on the bike. Obviously, of course, everybody is unique, but these young riders, you do see some interesting positions which are somewhat finessed when they move on to pro teams. The pro teams have a look at the positions, but no, it does sit quite low at the front for a climber.
Yeah, very low at the front of the bike for a climber. And sometimes a lot of the younger riders tend to set up their bikes depending on what they think looks cool at the time. Slammed a negative stem. Is as long as it's that, then it's okay. Like everything is good. I can definitely. I'm going to be fast. That tends to happen a lot.
It is a bit of a trend in the peloton, and for those of you watching who are wondering what we're talking about in terms of the term slammed, it basically means a very, very low position frontally at the bike. So you see the stem, which attaches the bike, of course, to the handlebars in the frame. That, as you can see on the rider in front, is negatively inverted, so pointing downward, giving the rider a very low position. Now the UCI have actually changed the rules and regulations on the slammed position, so they can actually tilt their saddle down 9 degrees rather than 3. Yeah. So we've been seeing this trend in the peloton, but more for the rouleurs. You spend a lot of time on the front on the flat, but the young riders maybe look at that as the ideal position. But anyway, it's an interesting point, but as you say, very, very low frontally. Doesn't look quite as comfortable maybe as he should want to climb.
No, it does look like he's sort of pulling himself too far forward over the bike, but that's obviously up to him and his technical staff and his team to work out whether that's the right thing for him or not. But to me, it just doesn't quite look right.
But Egg looking good at the moment, regardless of the position. Very, very effective. Bernal on his wheel hasn't given him a turn at all. So the 22-year-old from Denmark rides for Team Velo Concept, the Continental squad, opening up a nice bit of a lead here. There's the Norwegian, just the Danish rider, and it's the Norwegian rider now who's trying to close things down. I'm trying to see if I can see James Knox of Great Britain. And it's actually the Australian who's coming across, Lucas Hamilton, 4th place on the general classification. Good bit of riding by him. Managed to jump across that gap.
It just looks like it's leveling out a fraction here on the climb now. It's not quite as steep, and with that, Hamilton has managed to find a bit of energy to move across to Bernal and Egg.
Well, 3 riders now in front, Bernal, Egg and Hamilton. And what is the gap to the group behind? I can just see James Knox there. He's in second wheel with that jersey flapping around. Not able to do much about closing this gap now, but with 2 riders willing to work on front, well, still only 1 rider. Egg is the only rider contributing to the pacemaking at the moment. Bernal, unsurprisingly. Well, that's an interesting bit of a tactical manoeuvre there. I think it just shows Bernal has also got a shrewd tactical mind on board, as well as a strong pair of legs. Swung off to force the Australian to close the gap and get back on the wheel.
Yeah, and he obviously sits in a position where he's got full control of what anyone is doing, so any any attacks. Well, the riders are less likely to attack with him sitting right in front of him, because you don't have any kind of element of surprise. So they would have to really attack on just having crazy good legs, basically.
Oh no, definitely. I mean, you can see Bernal there looking very, very smooth, and it is both Lucas Hamilton and Niklas Egg who have the most to gain here, so he's happy to let them do the pacemaking. They're the riders moving clear of the riders just behind this cluster of riders. Remember, we have James Knox in 2nd place overall at 1 minute, and then 10th place on the general classification is at 1 minute 23, so all to play for midway through.
It looks like James Knox is just having a bit of trouble hanging on to the two riders that he was with right then. Not looking like the best of days for James Knox.
Knox a little bit starting to suffer on this climb now. 1.8 kilometers to go, and still the Danish rider on the front, Niklas Egg, hardly even looked around for some assistance. The Australian Lucas Hamilton is just behind him, 21 years of age, rides for the Mitchelton Scott team, essentially the feeder of the Orica Scott team. And here is the study of concentration here. This is the British rider who at the moment is losing his 2nd place on the general classification, James Knox. 21 years of age, rides for Team Wiggins, just been distanced by that group. He's now 6th on the road. But what advice would you give him now, Magnus, if you're his director sportive to riding along? So what do you say to him? Just
ride within yourself, find the power that you can produce and that you're happy to hold for the next 1.5 kilometers, and just work at that. Don't look at the guys in front of you, don't worry what's coming behind you. It's all about an individual time trial effort. If that means you getting back onto the wheels of these guys, great. If it doesn't, then so be it. There's another day tomorrow, and a big day as well. It is a big day, but he hasn't lost too much time. It looks like it's about 10 or 15 seconds at the moment, although he is dropping back, but he's got them in sight. If you can try and keep them in sight, that'd be a good idea. But as you said, Magnus, it's on a climb like this, if you're dropped, you've got to be so careful. Some real big speed being set here, and interestingly now, the Norwegian rider is getting back in contact. Some good riding there by Tobias Foss. He's 17th overall, but riding very strongly and has now made contact. He's got the Belgian Bjorg Lambrecht with him for company. Yeah, I think Foss is doing a fantastic ride today, really strong to get himself back into the front group, and then in the mix now with only just over 1 kilometer to go to the finish line. Well, a great ride by Tobias Foss there. Lost 2 minutes and 8 seconds on yesterday's stage. So he, in this front group of 5, has the most to gain, so looking very good. But it could have been that he just didn't enjoy the rest day and having the travel in his legs and then getting out and doing that. He's just not feeling 100%. Well, a big attack here from Tobias Foss. Goes to the front. Maybe he is thinking about time, but a look over the shoulder there from Lucas Hamilton. Hamilton not happy. He's either got sore legs or he's not happy with the tactical situation here, forcing Egan Bernal to close the gap down to the two riders in front. And then we have Bjorg Lambrecht of Belgium. He sits at only 1 minute and 9 seconds, but 800 meters to go now. And where is James Knox sitting in 2nd place? He's just rounded the corner there. He's got back into the car, so not too far away. No, he is not too far away. I think it is actually, you were right there, he has been down on the ground. Lucas Hamilton is certainly well, somewhat of a strange logo if it is one. Sorry, I thought that was a strange Australian logo. It does look like he's laid it down and taken some of the lycra out of his shorts there, but look at that, great riding here by Lucas Hamilton. He would drop round that hairpin, fighting to get back onto the wheel of the Belgian Bjorg Lambrecht who's there. But this group at the moment has been led by Tobias Foss of Norway, the rider with the most to gain in this group. And looks to me, Magnus, as if the rider in front from Norway is trying to ride more for the general classification here than the stage. He's got Egg on his wheel, and then of course Egan Bernal, the race leader, taking a gel very late in the stage. That was quite interesting. Looks like he was taking a gel. Good for the descent going back to the hotel. Well, there we go. Again, maybe that was just a bit of mind games there. I mean, eating in the last 800 meters of a stage. I mean, what must that do to the psychology of the other riders there, riding full of confidence here. Bernal drops to 4th wheel, forces the Belgian into the prime position here. And meanwhile, we're seeing Lucas Hamilton detached by that increase of pace. Again, he's going to just try and keep focused, try not to bloat, try not to push himself into the red.
But I would say here, it's definitely Tobias Foss trying to push himself up into the top 10 at the moment.
Lambrecht is the only one who's up into the big ring. I think Bernal's just switched up into the big chain ring as well, getting ready for the sprint.
Well, Lambrecht winding it up on the right-hand side there for Belgium. Looks like he's really leaning on things now, and Agut opens things up. Starts to turn those pedals, putting some right force through, but so easily. The race leader got back into his slipstream. Only 150 meters to go now. The Belgian Lambrecht is leading things out. Opens things up, and on the inside goes Bernal. Bernal goes in the yellow jersey. Bernal rounds the final corner. Who is going to take it to the line? A very tight finish here. It is stage win number 2 for the Colombian. What a way to impose yourself on this race. Back-to-back stage wins by the 20-year-old Egan Bernal of Colombia. Took the win from Bjorn Lambrecht. What a fine victory by the Colombian.
Well, that was a really good piece of tactical riding by Bernal, and even all the way up until the final couple of 100 meters, he clearly knew exactly what this finish was like. He spotted where the corner was. He makes the move in the straight line, kind of surprises Lambrecht, the Belgian, goes on the inside, and at this point Lambrecht just had too far to go. Regardless of whether he had legs or not, it was just never going to work out for him. And very smart riding by Bernal, who clearly had the upper hand on pretty much on everyone pretty much all day.
Yeah, he had the upper hand. He was forced on a couple of positions to ride on the flat, but again, it looks like he's clearly read the road book as well here. Took the inside line. A good attack by the Belgian, but Bjorn Lambrecht made the mistake of leaving a gap on the inside. He knew that it was going down to the right-hand side. Little bit of a schoolboy error there. Should have forced the Colombian wide. But you can't take anything away from Bernal Gomez. The opportunity was there, presented itself to him, and he executed it to perfection.
Yeah, I think Lambrecht made that mistake of leaving the door open on the inside. If he'd made Bernal go around him, I think he would have won that stage. And it just comes down to the simple facts of just going through on sort of online mapping softwares that we can get, you know, just go through, look at what it looks like, how tight is that corner, because what they draw up in the race book is not necessarily always the right thing. So, you know, get the street view of what the finish looks like, and in that way you know what you're dealing with, and look at it from various different angles.
Well, imposing himself on the Tour l'Avenir, he goes into the final stage in the yellow jersey. Is Egan Bernal of Colombia. Well, the penultimate day of the Tour de l'Avenir, won by Egan Bernal Gomez of Colombia. Lambrecht of Belgium was second at the same time. Nicholas Egg third at just 2 seconds, and Tobias Foss fourth. Lucas Hamilton in 5th position. Well, as the groups round the corner to finish the stage, they have another brutal stage to come tomorrow. For the final stage of the Tour l'Avenir, that takes us from Bourg Saint-Maurice to Albiez-Montrond. 107.4 kilometers. Can anybody unseat the rider in yellow, who takes another stage win in this race to increase his lead on the overall classification? At the moment, it's all about one man, but we still have one stage to go. Keep it here in Eurosport for the final stage of the Tour l'Avenir tomorrow. Coming up now, the Vuelta.